Hey guys, have you heard the news that recently many of the August SAT testing centers for 2020 have been closed? And are you wondering, is it even safe to take the SAT or the ACT right now? If so, in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the issues on both sides of how safe it is for us to go back to standardized testing in the midst of a pandemic. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Brooke. I've been teaching the SAT and the ACT for over a decade and a half. I have 2 online courses at SupertutorTV that you can check out if you're interested in studying for those. I've coached students to perfect scores on both of these exams. I also have a couple of books out on Amazon on the ACT math section called The Best ACT Math Books Ever. You can check them out there, or leave us a review if you really like them. Finally, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and subscribe to our newsletter, which is totally free, supertutortv.com/subscribe. Cool, let's get into this. Disclaimer, I am not a public health official and I am not a medical doctor. So the ideas that I express here are just ideas that I have heard in the marketplace because I am listening to this conversation as it is a topic that is near and dear to so many of you guys out there and many of the students that I work with. And so it's certainly a topic of conversation in the circles that I am in. And so I wanted to highlight some of that conversation that I see going on. It does not mean that I am in any way an expert or a voice of authority when it comes to health recommendations. But I will be quoting some organizations that are professionals in those venues and sharing with you some things that I find interesting on the topic. So the first thing that I want to talk about is recommendations from public health officials or organizations that maybe we would trust. We can look at perhaps the recommendations of the CDC and the World Health Organization when it comes to when schools should reopen in terms of the COVID crisis. And they have recommended that schools don't reopen unless they have a positive case rate of under 5%. So what is a positive case rate? Well, it's when we take all of the tests that have been given for coronavirus of people who want to get tested and say what percentage of those people actually have the thing. So where is America at? Like, what's our scorecard on this? Are we close? Are we not so close? Well, Johns Hopkins has a website. They have some research, some coronavirus research that basically breaks this down. Florida, for instance, right now is hovering around 15%. California is around 7%, right? And you can look up every state and see kind of like what their percentage is. And then you could maybe assess in a broad way, like, are these places ready to go back to school according to these guidelines? So as you can see, we're not all below 5% right now. And that might call into question whether it's safe to go back and take the SAT or the ACT. Again, I'm not making this decision. I'm just saying that's their guidelines. And we're not there yet in some states, but we are there in other states. So what should we do? I don't know. And what are states deciding to do? Well, they're deciding to do whatever they feel like doing right about now. And sometimes that means being more aggressive than what these numbers show. And sometimes it means being less aggressive. And it just kind of depends on where you live. But it's something that's kind of interesting for thought, something that you guys can look up. So next thing that I want to talk about is testing different from school? Is it a greater risk, a lower risk, etc.? Now, I would argue that taking the SAT and the ACT might be even safer than going back to school, because if this disease is transmitted by mouth secretions, coughing, sneezing, talking, right? The little particles in the air that come out when we speak, when we talk, when we breathe, all of those kind of good things. Wouldn't it happen more often when you're speaking or singing or playing euphoniums or shouting or talking or things like this? Probably, right? And what do you do when you take a standardized test? You're really quiet and you don't talk, except for maybe the person at the front of the room, and it's fairly brief. It's not like the whole time. So I would think, because people aren't really talking and you're not really socializing, and even in between the tests, there's sort of this pressure not to like over socialize, and maybe they could even cut back on the socialization at the breaks or something, who knows. But in any case, there's this pressure to not talk, right? And to not be too close to each other already. So you're entering an environment where they distance you out because they don't want you cheating from each other's papers, and you're not talking at all. So it might even, and again, I am not a doctor, I'm not a public health official, but I would think from the guidelines that people have put out there that taking a standardized test might be somewhat of a less dangerous environment than some classroom experiences. I think that's probably at least fair to say or to conjecture, okay? The other thing that I'm going to say about a standardized test is a standardized test is like one day out of the year where you sit there for 4 hours. And going back to school is usually something that happens every week after week after week after week, right? The SAT and the ACT, you can take it once or twice, and it's like 2 days out of the whole year. So I think the fear that's building up around these tests versus the fear of going back to school, I would be much more concerned about going back to school than going back for 1 day to take a test. And if I had to choose between the two, I would personally rather hang out and be a little bit risky for 1 day of my life than for every day of my life. And I don't know how you guys feel, but if we need some sort of academic benchmark from people, and we're doing all this online learning and it's hard to test students because they could all cheat, and so we don't have any real grades and everything's just based on effort and completion versus the actual content, yada, yada, you get where I'm going with this, right? So in that case, maybe it's safer than going back to school because it's a limited amount of time. So you can feel a little bit better about that. So the next question, to get to the point of this video, which is it safe if you're taking this on Saturday and you're freaking out? Well, here is one case study that we might be able to look at to see if it's safe or not, and that is what happened at the July ACT. So as some of you know, right in the middle, smack dab in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, there was an ACT in July that took place at 1,100 testing centers, I believe, and accommodated quite a few students. And from that testing date, I could only find evidence of a single test center that had reports of COVID-19 at the test center. And that was in Oklahoma, where 2 students were known to have taken the test while having COVID-19. They were asymptomatic at the time. And as a result, ACT sent horrible letters to everyone who was in their vicinity, telling them that they were potentially in the vicinity of COVID-19 positive persons, and recommended that they quarantine and test themselves for the virus. I would imagine that had other test centers had people who knew they were COVID positive and then took the test and then they reported it to ACT, this happened again, there would have been thousands of students who this happened to. And if somebody then in turn gave COVID to their family because they thought they got it at the ACT, we would have seen a headline about that. And then there would have been this whole article about how standardized tests aren't safe, right? But we never saw any of those articles. That doesn't mean that none of those stories happen, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a lack of tracking and tracing in our country. There totally is. And we could learn a lot more if we did more tracking and tracing, right? And we knew where the disease was coming from. And it's also hard to say because there's so many activities that we all do in our everyday lives that could expose us to COVID-19, right? Maybe it wouldn't be taking the ACT, maybe it would be going to the grocery store or going to work or whatever else or whatever other activities people have. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, but I would say it's at least encouraging that out of 1,100 test centers, there was only one headline that I could seemingly find about people having COVID. So if you are taking the test this weekend, I would take a little bit of heart in that, at least anecdotally, there doesn't seem to be a huge giant swath of outbreak of COVID-19 from the ACT that happened in July. Now again, I am not a public health official. I'm also not an expert in things that were never reported, and I can only look at what's available from Google searches and looking through the news and trying to dig up what I can. But as I did find that, I didn't see like tons and tons of horror stories of how, super spreader events of the ACT or the SAT were. And the final thing that I'm going to talk about is, do you even have a choice whether this test is safe for you or not? Because a lot of times other people are making that choice for you. And who are those people? Well, those can be the school where you're taking it itself. That could be the district in which that school exists. That could be the city or municipality or county in which those entities are, or even at a statewide level. We've seen almost every testing center that I know of in the state of California be canceled for the August administration. Other testing centers and other places have reduced capacity. And the College Board, and this is as of when we're shooting this, has said only 54% of test centers are open, and I'm sure that number is going to shrink, or will already have shrunk by the time this video gets released. And I would guess that, only half of test centers or so are going to be open by test day. These cancellations may continue to come in up until you take the test, so I encourage you guys, if you are taking the test this Saturday, go ahead and check online before you drive over to the test center so you don't waste any gas. But in any case, if you are scared silly because you're going in to take the SAT, I would say don't be scared, be safe, wear a mask, try to make sure that it's tight fitting. You can look up lots of tips for how to make your mask more effective and take the precautions that you can take to protect yourself and protect others. And wash your hands frequently, all that good stuff that all of the people who are experts on health have been telling us to do. So I hope you guys liked this video and found it informative. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. And I encourage all of you who are going out to take the SAT, be safe And good luck on the test. Don't stress out too much about it, because the hope is that when we take precautions, at least we're doing the best we can to protect as many of you as we can. And if there were no big headlines already from the July test and the handful of June tests that took place for the ACT, hopefully the SAT in August is not going to be an exception. I wish you guys the best. Stay safe, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.